Well, joining me now is the geopolitical analyst and director of the Global Strategy Group, Marco Vicenzino. Marco, the elections were quite a while ago now, and once the results came in, Prime Minister Netanyahu claimed a decisive victory. So why has it taken him just so long to actually form a government?
Since the State of Israel was created in 1948, basically there's always been coalition governments. No single party has won an outright victory. But it's a system whereby you need a minimum of a 3% threshold in order to enter parliament. And a disadvantage of that type of system is that the minority parties can hold the larger parties hostage to their need, to their basic interests. So as a result, you see, although it's a fairly right-wing orientated government, the thing is that there's always differences between Israel's secular right and its religious right.
And I mean, with a majority of just one, is this government really going to be able to achieve anything? And if so, how long is it going to last?
Historically, these governments of this nature have not lasted a full term. In the early 90s, you had Yitzhak Rabin that led a similar government with similar numbers. It didn't last a full term. What happens is that Netanyahu, basically in December of 2014, he thought, due to political complications, he felt the need to call a snap election, very confident that he would get a right-wing mandate. Well, he did go through the election process. Contrary to many expectations, he himself and his party did very well. But ultimately what happened is that he comes out, he's his fourth term as prime minister, but he comes out in the weakest way possible. Once again, it's due to these intricacies of the Israeli political system.
Well, you mentioned the intricacies is one way of putting it. I mean, given that there's never really been a thumping majority for any one party in Israel's history, has there ever been a serious consideration in the country about the validity of its proportional representation system?
Well, there's talk about always reform of the nations, of the constitution, of the system itself. But ultimately, it'll be very difficult because in a system whereby you have parties with a minimum of a 3% threshold, most of them will be unwilling to give up on that. They want basically a piece of the pie. And in that sense, it's going to be very difficult to convince any minority parties to change the system.
Absolutely. Well, let's look at Jewish Home Party that Mr. Netanyahu's formed this deal with. I mean, what's he had to give away? What's he had to concede in order to get back in government?
Basically, Netanyahu was relying on 67 seats out of 120 because he thought he had the former foreign minister Avigdor Lieberman, his votes from his party. Lieberman pulled out, and as a result, he had to rely. He became a hostage, more or less, to Naftali Bennett's party, who needed the 8 votes from that party to get the 61. What they wanted was the Justice Ministry, the Agricultural Ministry, and the Education Ministry, and they got all 3. So in that sense, the winner, the clear winner out of this whole intricate system seems to be, at least for present, Naftali Bennett and his party. And
is that where the concessions end, or is this an indication of the direction in which this government will travel? I mean, has this now tinged in a certain direction?
It's obviously it's a strong nationalist government and a strong religious government. But once again, you have those divisions between the secular right and the religious right. They quite united in the sense of against the creation of a Palestinian state, in favor of expanding the settlements. But obviously, when it comes to spending money on the religious segments of the society, that's where a lot of the polarizing debates begin. So yes, it has a lot in common, but there's enough to distinguish it that can hold this government hostage and lead to its possible downfall earlier than later.
Well, you mentioned the settlements. Let's talk about those for a minute. Naftali Bennett, leader of the party, Jewish Home Party, does count on settlers in the West Bank for his support. He's talked about he's not really committed to a two-state solution, and he's also called for some parts of occupied territory to be annexed into Israel. What does this mean for the peace process?
Well, basically, John Kerry, American Secretary of State, his attempt to revive the process failed last year. Now, with this current government, particularly with Bennett, once again, they're against a two-state solution. So what does that leave you? With a one-state solution. And if you leave on a one-state solution, you rely on that, you have to question whether Israel can remain a Jewish state, because at some stage it may be outnumbered by the Arabs, Palestinian Arabs. And secondly, will it remain a democratic state? Because what happens is that if you have one-state solution, obviously the Palestinians become second-class citizens in that country, don't enjoy the full rights, and it'll give claims to an apartheid unified system, and it'll risk further alienation. So once again, that's why many are saying, particularly in the United States and other countries, is saying they want a two-state solution as opposed to the one-state solution.
So perhaps it's a case of the United States and other parties looking for a comprehensive Middle East peace solution, just sort of crossing their fingers and hoping this government doesn't last very long.
Yes, it'll be difficult under this current government to go the quote-unquote, the peace process. Once again, John Kerry failed in his attempt last year. Ultimately, the U.S., when it said after the election, Netanyahu, the day before the actual election, said that he was against the one-state solution. And the day after, said he was for it in principle, but only not in the current status quo, the way things are. So the American government said that it'll reassess its policy towards Israel, but ultimately it really lies with the peace process, lies in the hands of Netanyahu, for now at least. The American government is not willing to challenge Netanyahu on that. Their main priority, the Obama administration, is basically the nuclear talks with Iran, and they're not willing to confront neither the U.S. Congress or Netanyahu at this stage in time.
Well, finally, Marco, let's just talk about the United States for a little bit longer. I mean, obviously, the presidential election there is hotting up. So I suppose that's another reason for this issue just to be left on the back burner, let things resolve themselves, and then come the new occupants of the White House, they can take a fresh look. And who knows, there might be a new Israeli government by then.
Between now and the American election is quite a long time. Anything can happen between then. Obviously, the government could collapse. But from the American foreign policy perspective, the main thing they're looking at right now is that Iranian nuclear deal. And today, the U.S. Senate passed a vote with big numbers, basically tying the hands or tying the flexibility or limiting the flexibility of the Obama administration right now, which presents even greater challenges for them. And the last thing, once again, they want to do is confront Netanyahu at the present time.
Okay, Marco Vicenzino, thank you very much for your analysis on that story tonight.